this was back in 2019 when this 14-year-old angsty little child was just done with like having significant arguments with his mom all the time, right? He was hurling all sorts of really bad insults at her. He was telling her how he does not want to live with her, how he would rather spend all of his time in some remote little area, in some hilly area with random strangers, that he absolutely does not want to speak to her at all. And just like all 14-year-old kids, he was not listening to what he was saying at all, right? Kids just say what they think, they don't listen back to it. But his mom most definitely was listening to it. And so 2 weeks later, this kid was packing his bags to go to St. George's College, which is a boarding school in Missouri. This kid was me. I was that kid. So 2 weeks later, I was in Missouri, ready to embark for next few years at this new boarding school. Now, I have been a relatively pampered child all my life. I've been relatively privileged, and being a single child, my parents have protected me in a pretty significant manner all my life. And I've also attended, up to that point, up to 2019, I had only attended one other educational institute. I had only attended one other school at that point. So going to a new school, especially a boarding school, was just an insane culture shock for me. It was really difficult to fit in. But one place where I did find a lot of solace and I did find my place in the community was the debating society at St. George's College. It is actually at the debating society that the roots of my talk find themselves. So the first memory that I have of the debating society was when I was introduced to the concept of turncoat debating. So turncoat debating, for the uninitiated, is a form of debating which is extremely counterintuitive and extremely interesting. So essentially what happens is that you get like 4 to 5 minutes of prep time. Then you spend 4 to 5 minutes, depending on what the format is, proposing the topic. Then there is a switch in the middle. So there's a gavel that hits the podium, the gavel goes tuck, and then you switch sides after that and you oppose the topic. So you make arguments, you make a case for the first 4 minutes, and then you switch and then you make the opposite case for the next 4 minutes, right? So for example, if you're debating societal governance principles, for example, so you spend 4 minutes arguing the pro-democracy side, and then the gavel pounds, and then you spend 4 minutes arguing the pro-authoritarianism, anti-democracy side. So it's really interesting and really counterintuitive, because you just make a case and then you destroy it in the next 4 minutes, and then you add some counter-arguments. So when I heard of it, I thought, okay, I'm going to be pretty decent at it. I hope that I'm going to be pretty decent at it. But when I did it, I spent the first 4 minutes making the case. And then the gavel pounded on the podium, and then I just froze. I couldn't make the case for the other side. And this was really surprising for me, because I thought that I had been a decent speaker at that point. I kind of prided myself for being a good debater. But I simply could not make the counterpoint, the counter arguments for the other side. And so I started thinking as to why that is. When I sat back down, and when the other members of society, they started sort of analyzing what I could have said, I realized that there was a lot that could have been said for the other side. There was a lot of potential for a very fruitful debate at that point. But my mind had simply not gone there, and I was curious as to why that was the case. Why had that happened? Why did I not think of that stuff, right? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it was because my personal opinion had aligned with the first case that I lost the ability to argue for the other side. And then when I thought about why that was the case, I tried to dig deeper into how information works and how opinion formation works. And I realized that almost all of your opinions are essentially formed by the media, by the type of media you consume, right? The articles that you read, the social media, the news channels, the printing press. And so when I thought about it, and I read upon it, I didn't think about all of this stuff. I wasn't that smart in 9th grade, nor am I right now. But I realized that media today acts as the sort of epistemological gatekeeper of society, right? Media decides narratives. Media, by and large, decides what the truth is and what the society sort of operates on, the thought process on which society operates on. And so, because of the fact that it is driven by viewership, and not by like empirical evidence and academic research, it is in the media's best interest to promote narratives that mobilize the masses, to promote narratives that make the consumers of those narratives shut their brains off, put up their hands up in arms, and make these small little bubbled communities that are only listening to that one viewership and hate the other side. That is kind of what its best interest is, because, well, that's how it gets its money. It's a sad reality, but well, that's just how it is, right? So I realized that I had bought into this like ideological way of thinking really badly, and I could only speak for one side in an effective manner because I never actually bothered to engage with the other side in any capacity whatsoever. I had never actually bothered to look at what the other side was saying and the arguments that they were presenting in a meaningful capacity. And so I could obviously not argue for the other side, right? And so when I thought about how do I fix this, how do you actually form good opinions, and what is the correct process for forming correct opinions, I discovered the concept of Nullius in verba. Now, Nullius in verba is a Latin principle, a principle in Latin that is very science and research and experimentation and statistics based. Essentially what it means is that you should not take anybody's word for it. So if anybody tells you something, that is not sufficient evidence and that is not sufficient content for you to build opinions or build beliefs based off that. But it is very science-based. But if you think about it, the philosophical sort of underpinning for Nullius in verba is the fact that if somebody tells you something, you need to challenge that. You need to challenge what you're hearing, and in challenging that, you need to explore what other stuff there is to explore, right? So I realized that it is important for us to not to take no one's word for it, right? To think through ideas ourselves, to zoom out, to look at the bigger picture, to look at all potential arguments from all other sides, and to consistently challenge every single piece of information that you consume, right? And so I learned how to zoom out. Zooming out involved finding counter arguments. It involved then analyzing those counter arguments, and then after that analysis, if those counter arguments make sense, I changed my position, or I formed my position in new topics that I hadn't explored accordingly. It wasn't a thing about me having to prove my position right. It was from a place of objective reality, from a place where you can be wrong. And in analyzing those counter arguments, that is a mechanism for you to alter your positions, alter your views, and basically build a better worldview for yourself. So now this process of constantly challenging yourself and challenging your worldview is extremely painful, right? It is extremely hard for you to constantly reassess everything that you do. But the truth is that is the only real way for you to arrive at actual, real, defendable conclusions, right? That is the only way that you can look at a topic and then build a conclusion that you can justifiably argue for. So if the other person who does not believe in that position has to argue against it, you can confidently defend your position based off of that, because you've already looked at those arguments and you know exactly why those arguments are not, you've already considered those arguments, right? So as a result of this principle being incorporated in my life about having to constantly criticize and critically examine all of the information that I consumed, it really improved my debating performances. So because of the fact that I started consuming information differently, as a result, I now always looked at different sides. So even if my personal opinion was A, and I was in a competitive debating setting forced to argue for B, because you don't get to choose the positions you take in debates, right? If there's a debate about governance principles again, it is possible that you have to argue a side that you don't personally believe in. And so because of the fact that I started using this different approach, I improved my debating performances very significantly. So this time around, the chronology of the formation of my opinions was fundamentally different. I fully understood the other side's argument, and despite having a solid conclusion as to what side I support, I could speak for the other side as well very effectively. If I was asked to, I could steelman it, and I could defend other sides better than the actual believers of those other sides could in most cases. So when you apply this principle of questioning everything and challenging yourself and challenging your opinions, if you think about it in terms of group identity and in terms of how society as a whole is structured, you realize that in today's world, it is easy for us to stick with people who think like us. It is easy for us to form groups, right? It is easy for us to stay with people that are like us, and it feels pretty good because, well, your opinions are constantly validated and you find a community in these groups of people. But what ends up happening is that the other side becomes the bad side. The other side becomes the villains. What happens? You close your brains, you start shouting, you stop thinking. And as a result, you form these small little hate-filled bubbles that want nothing but the obliteration of the other side and not actual societal progress, right? That is the state of a lot of political systems around the world today. And so we need to change that. What is a better alternative? A better alternative is discourse. A better alternative is conversation, right? Conversation not with those who you support, and conversation not with those who you agree with, but conversation with those who you hate, with those who you disagree with, and with those who you think are absolutely wrong. So when this principle is applied across socio-political spectrums and across political systems, what happens is that you see a world which is far more rational and far more understanding in terms of what it believes in, right? What happens is that we don't see those debates on Indian TV channels where the chair of the debate is shouting on the top of his lungs, and one of the panelists is ripping their mics out, and one of the panelists is trying to throw a chair at another panelist. That does not happen in a world where people try to actively engage with the other side and actually try to come up with the real solvable conclusions. So that's the abstract societal part of it. But what I realized was that this practice of constantly questioning everything and constantly questioning every single belief and piece of information that I read actually seeped into other forms of my life in a manner that was really, really positive, right? So it led to a lot of personal growth because this started as a tactical tool for like improving my performance in competitive debating. But eventually it turned into a daily habit. Every decision, every belief that I held, and even the way I approached like my daily routine, it all began to change as a result of like constantly questioning everything. So it was not just restricted to pieces of information I read and like politics that I read. It was now also extended to how I went about my daily life, right? So the questions I asked myself were no longer no longer hypothetical, and they were no longer abstract. They were personal. They were immediate, right? So again, I learned how to zoom out, not just for society at large, but zooming out for myself. So this zooming out looked like analyzing habits. It looked like seeking improvement based on that analysis that you had, and then it looked like growing. So by being able to step back, to zoom out and see myself objectively from a third person point of view, from a point of view where I was not bogged down by my biases and judgments and my own opinions of myself, but actually of what I am as a person and what my habits are as a human being in an objective manner, I could then identify areas for growth and I could strive to improve in those areas and become a better human being overall. Now, this is all fun and dandy. It sounds pretty utopian, I realize that. Because there is a lot of potential for a lot of toxicity here. As you can see, the man is pretty angry at this point, which can be the case if you take this form of self-analysis and self-improvement too far. And this has happened to me personally as well. What happens is that your state of self-criticism and self-analysis becomes so rampant, and in the pursuit of optimizing yourself as a human being and optimizing your behaviors and everything else, what happens is that your achievements start meaning nothing to you because, well, you could be doing more. You could never acknowledge that you're actually doing pretty well in certain areas, and you start equating yourself with the worst form of yourself. And this is a very thin line that needs to be tread very carefully, right? This line between toxic self-doubt versus healthy improvement is very thin. But if you're on the right side of this line, you can constantly look for improvement and you can constantly talk to yourself with intent as to how you can be a better person overall. An equally important part of this whole like zooming out process is acknowledging what you get right. It's acknowledging that you are better than your shortcomings, that you're better than the worst parts of yourself, and better than the mess ups that you make in your life. So to end, today, in an increasingly polarized world, it is important for us to venture out and initiate conversation with the other side. And it is also equally important for us to zoom into ourselves and realize from a third person point of view what we are as human beings. This is discourse. Discourse with those who hate, and discourse with ourselves, with the human beings that are inside of us. The only way we can responsibly carry out this discourse is with intent. And so together, with intent, we can strive to be better human beings and make this world a better place.